Hello, I'm Catherine Brown Ramsperger, author of the award-winning The Shores of Our Souls, and you can call me Kathy. Welcome, 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 welcome to my story hour. I created this program when COVID first began to connect avid readers with brilliant writers, and thank you all for making it such a success. If you're one or both and you're new, you've come to the right place. So today, please join me in welcoming prolific and multi-award-winning cozy mystery author Michelle Cox. She's best known for her Henrietta and Inspector Howard series, but she's written much more. Her books have drawn praise from the likes of Kirkus and Book Life and hundreds of reviews of readers like me. She's the perfect first guest for this new year because I'm shifting my story hours to every third Thursday, so it'll only be once a month. If you want another view of me every month, go to my coaching page on the second Thursday, and I'll be interviewing coaches. Here, I'll be interviewing authors whose novels or memoirs. I don't think I'll do collections anymore. It's just not feasible. Feature themes like my books: multicultural relationships, immigration, travel, war, peace. This doesn't exclude the family dynamic because blended families are a big topic in my own novels. Um, Basically, social justice themes. Michelle does all this and more in her novel, all while keeping us on the edge of our seats. And a little tidbit that you might want to know: unbeknownst to most of us, Michelle hoards board games that she doesn't have time to play, and I understand why she doesn't have time to play. And not surprisingly, is addicted to period dramas because this series takes place in the 30s and big band music, as am I. Also, marmalade, and I'm not as addicted to marmalade. So, welcome, 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 Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a great intro.
Well, it's so nice to have you here. And I think we'll get straight to the questions. If you want to show your book cover, though, please do.
I'd have to let me grab it.
We have a lot of questions. So, and I'm sure the audience will have their own. So it's all in there. It's a beautiful novel. So, would you share a little bit of your writing backstory? I know bits and pieces, but not the whole, and I don't expect the whole thing here, but I know I'll learn something new. When did you know you wanted to write cozy mysteries, or did this somehow morph into a cozy mystery career?
Well, I toyed with the idea of being a writer in high school, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to pursue that or if I wanted to go into medicine. So
Mhm.
when I got to college, I picked medicine because I thought it would be easier than being a writer. Turns out it's true. No. So I went ahead and pursued a science degree, but then halfway through, I was taking a Victorian class, and I just thought,
Mm.
you you need to stop running from this. So I switched, and so I had to do like 4 years of reading in 2 years, but I did it. And then I ended up working in a nursing home, and I worked in a graphic firm. And what can you do with an English degree, really? Because I was still too scared at that point to write.
Yeah.
So then I got married, and I was a stay-at-home mom and all of that. And it wasn't until I would say fast forward all the way to like 2013, and my oldest was diagnosed as a sophomore in high school with ADHD,
Mm.
and then I started doing all this reading, and I'm like, I think there's something wrong with sexy kid too. So I thought, what are you doing with your life? You're on all these volunteer committees, and you're doing all this and that. You need to just be home with your own kids and like get them. So I quit everything across the board. It's really hard for me because I'm not really a yes person, and I, you know, got them therapy and got them tutors and all this kind of stuff. And then I had
I've
a
been
huge
there.
glut. Yeah, and then I realized that was kind of like an overreaction to
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah. I get it. I get
Yeah.
that part too.
So then I had this big glut of time, and I thought, you know what, you can either just go back to volunteering, you could get a job, or maybe you should try to write the novel that you've been running from all these years. So I decided to write the novel, and I didn't know anything about that. So I actually Googled how to write a novel, and that's how I taught myself to write that way. So what it
My
found,
goodness, you've got the gift.
well, that was a really bad novel. No, I won't say that. It wasn't a bad novel, but I tried to sell it for a
Well,
year.
all writing is progress, right?
Right. It didn't go anywhere. So I decided to start over. And I was trying to think of something that would appeal to an agent. So I thought mystery. I again had no idea what I was doing, and in terms of what an agent is looking for or anything about the publishing aspect. So I just went ahead and wrote this mystery, and then halfway through it, I realized that I really loved these characters as much as
So
the
do
characters
we.
in the first book. Oh, thanks. So I'm like, oh, maybe we could turn it into a series. So I did, but I didn't exactly like the premise that I had set up in that first book. So I kind of shifted the direction of where this was going a little bit, and hopefully I did that.
Well, I'm sure you did. I haven't read the whole series, but I've read this one and I've read one other, and I hope to read the whole series. I really do. It's to learn more about them. So you have so many story threads in this novel. I'm not sure how you did it, how you could keep it straight. You had 3 or 4 different mysteries simultaneously, and here's everything Michelle dealt with: epilepsy, mental illness, sexism, romance, asylums, orphans, child abuse, immigration, the Holocaust. Basically, I mean, it's right before, but there you can tell the diaspora is coming. Blended families, and of course, death. Um, so I want to read my favorite passage in the whole book because this is how deep her characters are. She felt sad, as she had when she cleaned out old Helen's cottage last summer, of the transitory nature of life, how all of one's treasures simply ended up in a box at the end of the day, considered to be junk by everyone else who beheld it. Bravo. All your themes and threads are favorites of mine because I write about the same kinds of things, the same kind of social justice themes. How did you keep all these story threads straight?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not really sure. I think it was just sort of subconscious, but I do have a pretty detailed outline. So every you know subplot or main plot is kind of charted out, and then I when I sit down to actually write the novel, then I figure out how I'm going to weave that together. And some of it really just comes to me as I'm writing. It really is inspiration. Um, but it's kind of like what I would imagine being a director of like a period drama would be, where you have this huge cast of characters and you can't have every character and every theme in every episode. So you kind of have to decide who's gonna have a role this time. So I don't know. It's a tricky thing to sort of juggle a lot of balls at once. And this book was my most ambitious because usually I have two storylines running, but this book I decided to try to do three.
Well, you were obviously ready for it because I knew where I was all the time. I teach, and I'm always telling my students I need to feel grounded. I can't be up in the air looking at this and not know who everybody is. You did a great job with that, and you switched points of view and settings very often, and yet I always knew exactly who they were, and you have a large cast of characters. You really do.
Thank you.
Um, so it's interesting to have Clive's and Gunther's point of view and backstories. Speaking of sexism, for instance, late in the book, we're told why Clive is so watchful of Henrietta and why Gunther is distant to Elsie. And yet, they're both incredibly masculine reasons that most females wouldn't let deter them or bring to a relationship. It's interesting that it's almost a built-in mechanism in men, not the book, even today, that they need to protect us from ourselves. I love and rebel against my own spouse's desire to keep me safe. And I've done some crazy things in my life. And so perhaps he has a reason. But do you think this will continue into the 21st century? And why or why not?
Wow, that's
Just an opinion.
yeah, that's tough. I think probably not, although I'm only speaking from, one demographic. There's plenty of people who are in real danger for most of their lives. So, just, speaking from this position, I think that, as women, you know, come more and more into an equal playing field, I don't think so. I don't think that that is something that will continue because, for one thing, think about it. There was once a reason why men were protective because, they were bigger, stronger, and could fight off the threat. But now that's really not the case. And so there's really no reason, to sort of have that sort of unequal roles.
I love that answer. So I liken your voice to a combination of Agatha Christie, my favorite, Daphne du Maurier. I read everything she wrote when I was a teenager. Jane Austen with a little Sherlock and Watson thrown in, especially the Sherlock and Watson TV series that just ended. Their relationship is very like that, except they're romantic, obviously. And I'm wondering if you developed the voice for the cozies because it is very 1930s and very like a British kind of. If I had picked it up and not known, I would have thought some of the characters might even be British because of their reservedness. But then I reminded myself that people in the 1930s hadn't been in this country very long. Wherever they came from, they brought that with them. So I think it's very realistic and authentically done.
No, yeah, I think that's a great observation of my voice. I think that really is the way I write. Um, I, um, I, I have thought to myself too that uh, my voice tends to have a little bit of a British style to it, but I think that that is because, well, number one, I've spent up until about age 40 reading English literature until my brain turned to mush, and then I, switched to some contemporary fiction. But also, I'm married to a Brit, and I spent 6 months living in London. So I don't know. I think I have a kind of an ear for dialogue, and I think that that comes across in the writing.
I agree. You have an eye for dialogue, an ear for dialogue, because there's a lot of dialogue in this book, and I happen to think dialogue is the most difficult thing to write, and the the best thing one can put in writing. I just think it brings the character to life, and there's a lot of dialogue, and I like that. Um, I think it's the perfect voice for these books because it's almost Downton Abbey. And while I wasn't a fan of Downton Abbey as much as the rest of the world, I could hear it a little bit, and it makes sense. And I also I loved those novels, Dickens and and Austen, and I love George Eliot, and so from the 1700s all the way through the early 1900s. Michelle, I find my own family's dysfunctions, and I believe all families have dysfunctions, to be right material for writing. Lately, I'm thinking that maybe it's in all of us, definitely most creatives, that we should write it down. So I'm wondering how much you draw on your own experience in this decade when you're writing about the 1930s. How much is research? I know you're an in depth researcher, so am I. And how much is complete imagination?
Okay. Well, that's a good question. I was always the kid at family parties that would sit in the corner and listen to the older people tell stories. And I can still remember some of those stories and those details. And I just think that I have that kind of a brain where it's kind of a sponge for historical facts. So I do use a lot of my past. My parents, great grandparents had a farm and they told lots of stories about that. And so sometimes I'll draw on some of those things. I also am very, very influenced by my job at a nursing home right out of college, where I collected a lot of these stories. And I've said this before in different interviews, but Henrietta is based on a real person. All of my novels have a, a little bit of truth to them. So even if I'm not using somebody's story from the nursing home to, blow out a whole novel, sometimes I do take little bits from these many, many stories and sort of weave them into one book.
Very interesting answer. I think it's wonderful to look inside a writer's mind, and we're all different, but there are similarities too. So now that we've got it all working, let's go to the audience, Kaylee.
Yes. So we have two questions right now, and the first one is from Tatiana Ramzoff, and she's asking, Michelle, I was able to read the first chapter of your book, A Child Lost Online. I'm hooked. And you sort of just went over this, but is this story based on any of your ancestors? If you want to elaborate a little bit more on what you were just talking about.
I want to break in and say that I wish I could read the entire back pages of that book to the audience. If you buy it, make sure you read that because you'll learn so much about the characters. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Michelle.
Yeah, Henrietta, like I said, is based on a woman who really did live in the 30s and 40s. And she was this bombshell that had a lot of different kind of seedy jobs because it was the depression and because she was so beautiful. She used to it wasn't that hard for her to get a job, which is rare during the depression. It was hard for her to keep a job because she was always getting felt up or pissed or something like that in the back room, and she would slap the owners because she was very virtuous and she'd be out of a job, which I think just you know uh would take so much courage for a woman in those times. And I really had to up the ante, and I made her not have a father and to be the breadwinner, so that it was even a more desperate decision when she would walk out on a job. So all of that was really real. So all of her jobs that are in the first novel were real, and she really was a taxi dancer. She really did work at a burlesque club. Um, there were many parts that are true. I had to make up the inspector, of course, and I had to make murder, but the rest of it is pretty true. Um, her family history is something that uh, I share. So I thought it was great that this woman in real life, her ancestors came from Alsace-Lorraine, and her father, the real woman, used to tell her and the kids that the von in their name meant that they were barons in the old country. And there's a branch of my family from Alsace-Lorraine too, so I thought, wow, I've got to put this in somehow. And later in the series, that Von Harmon connection is going to come into play. Yeah.
All right. And we have another question from Shanessa, and she's asking, how many books do you have planned for this series, Michelle?
Good question. No. You know what? I don't know. I am writing a book 6, so that's exciting. I would like it to keep going forever. I mean, I didn't start out with like a complete arc of, where we're starting and where we're going to end. It's kind of more open ended. I also would love to do a spin-off series and kind of take Elsie's storyline, because anybody who's read books like book 4 and book 5, Elsie's storyline gets about as much playtime as Henrietta and Clive. And it's, you were talking, Kathy, about, characters taking over and driving the bus. Elsie is one of those characters. And she was just supposed to be a bit role, and she kept wanting to have a bigger part in the story. And so she's now gotten to the point where she's featured as much as Henrietta. So I don't know how much longer I can keep that going. So I might have to split them off, but that would be fun too.
Plot twist. And those are all the questions we have for right now.
Thank you, Kaylee. So I kind of thought Elsie might have done just that. I wanted to say that. And I adore her. I also loved the mother. And I need to read back to see if there's more of her, because she's not exactly your most likable character. But I loved her because she was so well done, because you could just see it. All right. So, speaking of characters, I loved your depiction of the staff at the asylum. And I want my favorite quote from one of your villains, if not the villain. But you'll have to read to see if it's true. You can scream all you want. No one will hear or care. After all, this is an insane asylum. It's full of screams and the already dead. That already dead just cracked me up. I know I'm a little strange that way, but I just think it was such a funny line. Very Frankensteinish. I'm not sure I have a question about it. I just wanted to read it, but it's so well done. And do you know who your villains are when you begin a book?
Yeah.
The perps?
Yes.
Okay.
I am not one of those mystery writers who sort of wait until the end to figure out who the murderer is or the villain. I admire that greatly, because I just could never do that in a million years. My issue is that I have to, I try to make it so that it's not obvious. I have a group of beta readers, and they're very good at that. They get first copies, and some of them can figure it out, no matter what. They're like pro mystery readers. With this last book, almost all of them though could guess the villain, and so I did have to go back and try to make it a little bit more obtuse, and hopefully I succeeded. But yeah, I have to know ahead of time. And it's interesting that you would read that quote about the already dead. Because actually Dunning, like you said, there's a lot of material in the back of the book about Dunning, how it was really a real place. And it used to be called the Tomb for the Living. So it was really quite a nasty place. So yeah, I just wanted to say that.
I can't remember the author, but there is an author who also wrote a script for the theater, and it was produced at the Kennedy Center about 10 years ago. And it was about a woman who was committed to an asylum by her husband because he wanted to divorce her. It was absolutely heart-wrenching. So I don't mean to make light of it at all. But in a cozy, it just worked, you know? And having been in a lot of nursing homes in my life, I felt very realistic too. My daughter, when she was 1 or 2, and my mother died when she was 5. We'd go visit, and she wouldn't let any of them touch her. And of course, they all wanted to. And she said, "I can't do that, Mom. They'll, they're contagious. They'll make me old." So,
Oh.
yeah. So, it's read it. It's terrifying. Some of these last scenes, because Henrietta's gotten herself in a jam, and she's going to solve a murder. So, if not many. And speaking of other characters, Madame Pavlovsky, she's left up in the air a bit, and I wondered if she'd ever return. I have a feeling how she might, but only she can tell us that. I think you also made the resolution of Madame Pavlovsky very realistic, and I think it needed to be open-ended to do so, especially from what we know today versus what they knew in the 1930s. And she's a suspect, you know, so I'm wondering if you did research on that.
Not as fun besides, again, what I kind of already know. And most mystery series, whether it's like Scooby Doo or Agatha Christie or any of these, there's always going to be that one episode where there's spiritualist, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna do it. And it's such a fun, it's so fun to do because you're exactly right. Their idea of the spiritualist is very different than what we might think of now. And so that was easier to do because they're much more gullible, or they're much more, suspicious, whatever. So, yeah, I just kind of drew on, the basic stereotype of what a spiritual is. But as you're saying, I mean, I don't want to give too much away. It turns out to be not quite what you think, or he turns out to be not quite where the book is leading. So, and you're right. I'm hoping that she comes back in future books. I'm not exactly sure how, but she has to after the way the book.
Well, you've made me happy. I think she's so colorful. So I laughed out loud for Clive's assessment of Henrietta as another sexism comment, but I'm big on those. Why doesn't Clive realize that Henrietta might not be as naive or innocent as she thinks she is, since she seems to have, his quote, seems to have some detective sense in her? I think it's so strange how men can overlook that, hey, Henrietta solved this mystery and the last mystery. Sorry if any gentlemen are listening, but I have found that to be true in life.
Right? For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. He is, part of it is just really dramatic. The need for dramatic tension.
Okay.
You can't just be from the get go, oh, she's my equal partner, It's interesting that the first book, because he's not in love with her at this point, he's very willing for her to be part of the thing. And then once he falls in love with her, then now he's got real cold feet about,
And he's been through a lot to make him feel that way, which I won't reveal, but he has the backstory, and it's a tough one. And I won't reveal what her backstory is either, but they both have brought their traumas with them.
Right.
Yeah.
And it has to be sort of realistic for the era.
Mm.
He has to be. I've tried to make him very true to that mindset, and I think that even allowing her, even considering her to be a partner in his, detective work, I think is a stretch. Uh, you know,
Yeah,
fictional stretch to even go that far. So there has to be a little pushback on his part. Otherwise, I feel like it would be completely unrealistic.
thank you. I agree. So, was it hard to decide if Elsie and Gunter would stay together? And without any spoilers, was that a hard thing to decide, or you just knew what would happen?
I knew what was going to happen. They
Okay,
were kind of written that way for that reason.
perfect. Okay. Because I know she's had other stories, and other gentlemen. So,
And she's the least likely, right? She's this very, sort of diminutive character, and yet she seems to have all of these sort of romantic disasters.
I've known women like
Mm.
that. A lot of them. You could even say I was one. So you talk about, you've already spoken about the back matter. Can you tell us a little more about your blog, because that sounds fascinating too, and I want to really dig into it.
Oh, good. Yeah. The blog is basically, what came out of my working at the nursing home. It was a home called the Bohemian Home for the Aged and Orphans.
Mm,
So the real place. Of course, there weren't orphans there when I was there, but it was my job to interview these people, and I was only supposed to write seriously this much of their life story for the chart. And because we didn't have a lot of oversight, I was writing. No one told me what to do, so I was writing like I would spend a week or two with these people and write pages and pages and pages, and I would stick all of that in the chart. And the staff loved it. They would, come up to me in the hallway and say, "Oh, we read the latest one. It was great." I know, wasn't it sad? So when I was, you know, trying to build this writing career and a platform and all that kind of stuff, the PR company I had hired said, "Well, you need to start a blog." And I, I didn't ever read blogs. I just didn't care, and I thought, there's no way I'm going to do that. So they kind of let it lay for a while, and then they brought it back up and they said, you really need a blog. So anyway, a long story short, I decided to take these stories that I had heard in the nursing home, and I do change the names, but to put them out there and just see if people would like them. And I do feel like they're a big hit. Um, I have people who follow the blog that don't read my books; they just love the blog. So I think that that's kind of neat.
it's wonderful. It's wonderful. I have people that follow some of my blog and don't haven't bought the book too, so I understand. And they're still getting the message from it overall. Um, so let's switch a little bit to publishing, if you don't mind. You decided to team with the hybrid publisher, She Writes Press. Um, I love Brooke Warner. I applaud your mutual decision to collaborate. What would you say to an author who's trying to decide where to place their next book? How do you decide between hybrid or self publishing or traditionally? And I know that that is a very long answer. We could spend all day, but maybe you could say why you chose She Writes, because I'd love to give them a shout out anyway.
Oh, great. Yeah, you're right. It is like a huge question. I would say to somebody who is trying to make that decision, kind of think about what your goal in writing is. Like, why are you doing this? Are you doing it because you're really trying to be a career writer, or do you just have a story in you, or maybe a memoir that you just cross off your bucket list. Um, I think I think all forms of publishing are valuable. I'm hoping to maybe someday be able to publish in all three. Right now, I'm just in hybrid, but I'm trying to publish a novel right now with a traditional publisher, and I can see myself doing some self-publishing in the future as well. So, as Brooke Warner has said, each book, you know, doesn't have to follow the same path, even from the same author. It just depends on what's right for that book at that moment.
Mhm.
For me, when I was starting out, I didn't even know that there was such a thing as a hybrid press, and I heard about it at the Writers Digest conference in New York. And I had spent about a year trying to get this gargantuan, you know, other novel sold, and that was going nowhere. And I just thought, clearly I'm doing something wrong. So I decided to go to a conference, and so I was the brightest, sparkly newbie ever at this conference. I was very wowed, and I heard about hybrid publishing, and I just thought it sounded fantastic. I was in this panel, and I literally was looking around at everybody like, are you guys hearing this? This sounds fabulous. So I went home, I researched She Writes Press, and they did not take the big gargantuan novel that I had written. But by that point, I had written the first book of the series, A Girl Like You, and I said, well, what about this one? And they took me with it. So it went from there. So She Writes Press has been a good fit for me. I've done 5 books with them. I think that's like the world record. So now I feel like, I need to maybe explore some, other options. But it's hybrid publishing is a great place, or She Writes Press, I should say, is a great place if you want a book very professionally produced. They have traditional distribution, which is actually their key. Um, so that we're in libraries and bookstores all over the country and the world, and so that mimics traditional publishing, but we also have the creative control that you would have if you were self-publishing. It's a good fit for me.
Very broad and in-depth answer. Thank you. And I know there's some writers on here that appreciated it, including me. I also think with She Writes, one of the reasons you pay, I believe, is for distribution. Distribution is not cheap. And I'm still excited that you're going to go traditional, and I want to see that big tome of a novel someday, right? When you're
Someday.
famous.
Although,
Yeah.
the people who have read that first novel, every once in a while will say to me, "Are you ever going to publish that?" And I'm like, "Well, probably not, because I've stolen a lot of characters from there and stuffed them into the series. So I would have to rework it."
Right. I have one like that. It was the first novel I wrote that my brother always says, "That's your only Southern novel. You have to publish it." And I'm thinking, but I'm not sure I could even find the voice anymore because it's that of a 23-year-old. So, but I can always try. If I'm bored, I'll go try again.
Sure.
So I'm sure you're asked this a lot, because I am. What's your writing schedule like? Because you're prolific, and that's why you publish so many books, as well as your gift. I think you must put butt in chair a lot. And what was it like? What was your schedule like, and did it change? I'm sure that you're making earnings from this series now, but there's a time in every author's life where you don't get much money. And while that's not why we write, people, we don't write for the money. It does allow us not to do 5 other jobs. So I'm just wondering how you fit it in before and how you fit it in now.
Well, good question. I'm basically a very disciplined person. So, I take a long time to decide if I want to do something. And then once I decide that I'm going to do it, then I do it. So I just committed to sitting. I basically write every single day of the year. I mean, maybe not like
It
Christmas
shows.
or Thanksgiving or something like that, but really every single day of the year I write. And you can't, I would say this to any writer, you can't just wait for inspiration. You can't just wait for the feeling to come upon you. It's like exercise. No one jumps out of bed and says, I just feel like exercising today. No one jumps out of bed and says, I just feel like writing today. You have to sit down and actually just write, whether you have writer's block or whether you think it's crap or whatever. Because you can always go back and edit. And I just think that once you start building that discipline, it just kind of snowballs. And I think the difference between when I was first dabbling versus now is that when I first started writing, I mean my kids were very little, and so my youngest was little, and so I would clean the house, I would do all the stuff that I have to do around here, and then I would put her down for a nap, and then I would write. And by then my brain's pretty tired, so I had to shift it and say that the very first thing I do in the morning is write, and then the rest of the day is usually marketing, and you know, then I turn into a mom again.
Me too. I'm exactly the same. If I don't get it done, I don't get it done the very first thing because I have a morning practice. But if I don't get it done right after I take my shower, it might not get done. Right. That's a wonderful answer. Writing's a discipline, and you can be an amazingly gifted writer. I'm thinking Truman Capote here. Gifted writer. No discipline. So, it's just one example. So finally, I'd like to wrap up with just a few quick questions. I think a person's favorite children's book tells a lot about them as a writer and a reader and a person. So what was your favorite children's book, and what is your favorite board game that you never get to play?
Oh my gosh, that's so hard. Um, well, I would have to say as far as children's books, if you call these children's books, would be the Trixie Belden series. I was a huge Trixie Belden fan, and my best friend was
Me
an Nancy Drew.
too.
See?
Rabbit.
Yes, yes. And my best friend was a Nancy Drew fan, so we were constantly arguing who was the better detective. But I also love the Happy Hollisters before that, and my mom read a lot to us. Um, we didn't have a ton of books, but she always read to us, which I thought, now looking back, I think it's pretty amazing because she certainly wasn't read to as a child. So somehow she felt like that was important. And she modeled reading a lot. And so did my dad, oddly enough. Um, he was a big reader as well. So, not that they were reading, like classic literature, but they were reading. And I think that that was really something that we saw and thought was normal.
Board game.
Oh yeah, the board game. I was trying to avoid that. No.
We all want to know. Yeah, you could just throw one out. We'll never know.
My big, I love. I mean, I have a huge board game collection. I probably have over 200 games, and I'm constantly trying to get kids to play them with me. But my siblings are big game fans, so we are always playing when we get together. My favorite would probably be a game called Settlers of Catan. It's a big strategy game,
Haley
and
knows it.
I love those types like Puerto Rico, Hawaii, even Risk. I would play where you're really engrossed in it for hours.
My husband and I played Battleship for 3 days while I was in labor.
Oh.
Games are wonderful. They really are.
Yeah,
and a great tool for writers too.
They are, and I try to tell my kids when we're playing a board game, I'm like, you can tell a lot about a person's personality by the way they play a board game. So if you pay attention, you can find out a lot about people that
Yeah, you do. So I know these are COVID cocooning times, and that may mean more books have been written, or what's next for Michelle Cox? Is it more Clive and Henrietta, or this new novel that may be traditional? Not a traditional novel, but traditionally published.
Yeah. Right now I actually have written two standalones. So they're both set in the 30s. They're both set in Chicago. They're both based on a story from the nursing home. So one of them is currently out with several agents. So we'll see where that goes. And so while I was kind of waiting and pitching that one, I wrote a second one, which is actually the love of my life. I love this novel to bits. And so I'm working with an editor. I really want it to be the very, very, very best it can be before I send it out to agents. So I'm working on those edits. And then as soon as I finish those edits, I'm going to throw myself into Clive and Henrietta Book 6, which I might have to self publish. I'm not sure. So that'll be a huge learning curve. But I put the audio books out for the series, and now I am, one of the reasons I'm trying to get an agent, not because I want the big glamour of being seriously published, is because I'm hoping that whatever agent I get will have a connection to a film agent, because I'm really trying to sell the film rights for the series to turn it into some kind of Netflix thing. So it's the long way around, but that's kind of what I'm.
I think it's perfect, and I so see it as Netflix or something, because it's perfect. Yay! So hold on to your hats, people.
I know.
It's coming. Well, so congrats and best wishes, and I'd love for you to tell anybody that doesn't already know how to find you and how to find your books.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. You could go to my website, which is new and revamped. I just posted it today. It's michellecoxwrites.com. So you can find all my links there, where to follow me. Sign up for my newsletter. I highly encourage it, because I have these huge giveaways every couple months. Like, they're big, like, an iPad and a set of books and a whole bunch of other prizes. And it's always a newsletter subscriber that wins. Nobody else. Do that, and drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Michelle. And she means it. She has a heart of gold, and and every writer wants to hear from their readers or potential readers. I know how much you'll love them, because you're just so open-hearted. So do it, people. Let's go to final questions, and then I'll share my teabag wisdom, which is a feature, and I'm not getting rid of it. So call me Madam Pavlovsky.
Can't wait.
All right. So we have one question from Noelle Puglisi, and she's asking, is it easier to write with many characters in the novels or fewer characters, and why?
That's a great question. I guess it kind of depends on your genre. It's just a one-off novel or not. I would say, if it's just, let's just pretend it's a one novel, it's not a series. I would steer away from having a huge cast of characters, because that's way too much to juggle in the space of one novel. But you also want more than, two or three, or that might just be a little bit too slow or a little bit too interior. Mix it up a little bit. But I think it's important, though, that every character have a purpose, just like every chapter has to have a purpose. Because you can't just throw characters in just to have them there. Otherwise, that becomes pretty obvious to the reader.
Is that it, Kaylee?
Yes, but I actually just have one quick question. So, both you and Kathy are mentioning this cozy mystery genre, and I've never heard of that that term before, because when I think of mysteries, I don't necessarily think of cozy, but then some things like I think of Clue or something, the murder mystery game, and I do think that's kind of cozy, which I think is an interesting um, comparison or way to look at mystery. You just wouldn't associate the two together. So I'm wondering, can you kind of just describe what a cozy mystery is and what makes it cozy?
Well, that is such a fabulous question because I was going to say this at the beginning. I also with Kathy, I don't know if I don't think my books are very cozy. I mean, it's so weird because I do have a section of readers who feel like they are,
Mhm.
but then other um, readers will say, no, it's not a cozy. And a traditional cozy, to answer your question, is it's where there's no swearing, there's no sex, and there's no on-screen violence.
Hmm.
And a lot of times it takes place in a small town with an amateur sleuth, and
Hmm.
it's like they kind of have the detective friend that helps them solve the case, and they usually have some sort of hobby. So, like a cozy mystery series will be like, the bake shop mysteries, or the coffee shop mysteries, whatever. It always takes place in a coffee shop, or it has to do with quilting or cats or something like that.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because a lot of people label my books as cozy, and great. I'd love to be in the cozy genre because they have their own conference and everything. I'd love to go to. I'm not sure if mine really fit because I do have some kind of sexy themes. So, I don't know. What do you think?
You do, and thank you. Um, I I call it cozy. Well, I want to preface this. It might be a longish answer, but we've got a few minutes. We've got 2 minutes. Um, I don't believe in labels of genres at all. So it bothers me even to call it a mystery because it's so much more.
Hey,
However, the reason I did call it a cozy was so that people would know it wasn't full of blood and gore.
oh,
Mhm.
Now, Anne Rice doesn't write mysteries at all, but she's not cozy. So it also has an uplifting ending, and some regular mysteries don't. And if I liken it to TV series, I would say Sherlock and Watson versus it's not called Sherlock and Watson. That's just what I called the series. Versus something like, it's hard to talk about a TV show, but think about a Bruce Willis movie where there's a mystery. So it's not Bruce Willis. It
not a
is,
thriller. No.
yeah. And it also does the blood and gore doesn't necessarily not happen on screen, but it's tasteful. You don't need to put the book down and walk away.
Mhm.
And that's not what you want a reader to do anyway.
Oh,
So that's why I labeled it that. But I certainly hear you, and I certainly don't want to typecast it either because mine's been typecast a romance, and it bothers me. So I don't think I'm going to say what anything is anymore. Everybody's just going to have to find out.
it's
So here is my teabag wisdom. It's usually about the author of the book. This one was a mystery to me. I mean, I can kind of figure out how it applies to you in your books, Michelle, but I don't know you as well as I do some of the other authors yet. And it's in every moment of life, you should be what you ought to be. And I am assuming that it is saying that about your authenticity in writing and your authenticity in characters and the deep historical reference, but it's also you are who you are, and you can tell the minute you meet you.
thank you. That's
So
awesome. I love that. I love the teabag wisdom. maybe it's trying to tell me to keep going as a writer, because I've this whole past year I've
Well,
been
good,
I've been
because
sort
we
of,
all want that.
what am I doing? Why am I doing this? So
That just means you're a writer.
thank
Ask
you.
anybody that knows me. I ask that about once a week,
So don't take it seriously.
and have my entire life. So you know where to find Michelle now, and I thank you so much for your time, and thanks so much for being here today, both you, Michelle, and the audience. As I said, we'll be broadcasting live every third Thursday, correction. You can find recordings under videos on the left of your page and also on my YouTube channel. I'm looking for great books, just like Michelle's, to feature. Your recommendations are more than welcome, so please share on this page or message me. And again, themes of multicultural relationships, blended families, immigration, migration, social justice, and unconditional love during times of war, and how they bring peace to the microcosm and the macrocosm. And that's a whole host of books today. We're so lucky. And I want you to know next month I'll be chatting with N.K. Holt, author of Missing Peace, and it's a play on words, Peace. You'll have to show who is behind that pseudonym, because it is indeed a pseudonym. I'm not going to tell you, but she has graciously accepted an interview. And like I said, you can find out more about me and my work at shoresofooursouls.com. And you can find Michelle at michellecoxauthor.com. She's also in many book retailers. Are you on bookshop.org?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So including the Big A and bookshop.org and probably Barnes and Noble and your library. Yes. Thank God for libraries.
Yeah.
So thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Kaylee. This is Kathy Ramsperger from shoresofooursouls.com, bidding you a good weekend with a great book to read.
Thanks, Kathy. Thank you, Kaylee.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
I will be in touch shortly.